Hey kiddos, today we're going to look at a poem that's different. It's called Crickets, and it's about crickets. It's by this pretty famous American poet named Myra Cohn Livingston. She actually wrote a book about cricket poems. I don't know, I didn't read it. But this poem's interesting because of how it looks and how it sounds. So today I wanted you to already have it in front of you. So if you didn't grab it yet, go grab your writer's handbook. It's page 44, and it's called Crickets. First, look at how it's laid out, right? It's these two tall columns almost. And the question is, how do you read it? Do you read it down the first one, then down the second one, or do you read across, then across? And the answer is you read across and across and across. So it's split up into four stanzas, and each one is these two little poles almost. And I'm going to read it the first time, then we'll talk about it. There might be different ways to read it. This is how I read it. Crickets. They tell the time of night, they tick. The time of night, they tick. They tell of night, they tick and tell the time. They tick, they tell the time, they click. This is a poem not everyone loves, right? Because it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. There aren't a lot of different words. There are a lot of words that were repeated. And that's the trick. One of the things she does is she repeats words. What words get repeated? Time, night, tick, they, tell. I mean, those are basically the only words in there, and then click at the end. There are a few ways to look at it. One is that it's almost like the column on the left and the column of the right are two different crickets kind of chirping at each other, because you don't usually hear only one cricket. If you've ever heard crickets, and I'm sure you have, you hear a lot of chirp, chirp, chirp. It's almost like they're talking to each other. Chirp, 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 chirp. And these two columns could also look like cricket antennae, some people have said. I don't know. Some of the sounds, the words are short, one syllable sounds, so they sound kind of like cricket chirps. So that's onomatopoeia a little bit. But onomatopoeia is more specifically using words like tick and click that sound like what they're saying. But using words to describe or to give you the feeling of what it's describing, like words that sound like a cricket. In our next class period tomorrow, you will be listening to a poem that sounds like the waves on a beach, which is a lot more soothing than this one. There's nothing soothing really about it's tick, 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 tock, tick, you know? It's almost like a loud clock. I'm going to read it again and just listen for all these things. Crickets. They tell the time of night, they tick. The time of night, they tick. They tell of night, they tick and tell the time. They tick, they tell the time, they click. I mean, it's not very deep, right? It's not really telling a story and it's not really funny. And it's hard to understand what the heck she's even talking about. What do crickets do? They tell the time of night by clicking and ticking? Maybe that's exactly what they're doing. Their clicks and ticks tell the time of night. I don't know enough about crickets to tell you. But this poem is interesting because of the way it uses sound. So, what we're going to challenge you to do today is think of an animal, and if you don't want to do an animal, think of a different object that makes noises, and use those noises or words that sound like that noise or describe that noise in a poem. And it doesn't have to use some fancy pattern like this, where it's these two long lines. It can take any form. It can rhyme. It can not rhyme. But the idea is get a little creative with an animal. So let's say you chose a cat. Meow, like it's cats. They meow, they hiss, they purr, they cuddle, they snuggle their fur. I'm just winging it here. A snake. They hiss, they slither, they slide, they scoot. What else could we say? A dog. They bark, they woof, they howl, they bite, they chomp, they slobber. You can just pick something and you can be creative. And your first stab at a poem doesn't have to be amazing. The thing about poems too is you might think you write a poem, how could you do revision? How could you edit a poem? How could you make it better? Well, there are definitely ways to do that. And since they're short, it's actually in some ways easier because there's not as much to look at. In some ways harder because there's not much to work with, right? But just because you write a poem the first time doesn't mean it's finished. It might be garbage, honestly. If you were to talk to a published poet about how long they spend getting a poem right, I'm talking about like a 10-line poem, like they could spend months just trying to get that poem just right, looking for just the right word, just the right sound, just the right rhyme pattern, just the right number of syllables. It's crazy. You could drive yourself crazy trying to get all the details right. So just do your best. This is just having fun and learning a little about poetry. Pick something that makes sounds. Maybe it's your toilet flushing, right? And use that in your poem and have a little fun with it. Submit your poem to Schoology. We'll see you next time.